twisted sentience. The Earth achieving a final state by actively degrading itself, rising against its solar slavery, as the text puts it.
Degenerate wholeness. Twisted sentience. How can decay be seen as anything other than negative?
This is where the concept of decay, with a capital D, becomes critical and, frankly, counterintuitive. In this framework, decay is presented not as simple breakdown or a return to some pristine natural state. It's framed as a positive degenerating process.
Okay, hold on. A positive degenerating process. What does that even mean?
It's tricky. The idea seems to be that if acceleration makes stable definitions impossible, then decay is the process that actively erases the definitions of power. It allows power to persist, but hides it within obscure hosts, creating what's called an undead political machine. Dissolution isn't an end, it's a means for something else.
A means for what?
For excessive dimensioning and the proliferation of scales. It's like, by breaking things down, by dissolving stable structures, you allow for unforeseen complexities and new kinds of connections to emerge from the ruins on multiple levels simultaneously. It's generation through degeneration.
This sounds incredibly unstable, and it's mapped onto physical space too, this whole complex or holy space.
Yes, that concept describes a kind of space, maybe conceptual or actual, full of interconnected hidden recesses. These recesses allow the outside, the chaotic, the alien, the unexpected, to constantly emerge from within the system itself, preventing stability.
And there's a specific mechanism described for this instability, the worm function.
Right, the worm function or Niemann space. Think of it as a structural principle. It's something that undermines solidity by twisting endings back into middles. It prevents linear progression or final termination by constantly folding things back on themselves, creating convolutions.
Like a worm burrowing through something, creating interconnected tunnels instead of a straight line.
That's a good way to visualize it. It makes the space cryptogenic. Its origins and connections are hidden. And its links to this idea of anonymous until now, suggesting hidden agencies or forces operating within this convoluted structure. It's the structural basis for radical, unpredictable instability.
And how does this abstract worm-like instability connect to the real world, to politics or conflict?
The sources explicitly link it to military and political strategy, particularly through the concept of taqiyya. This is described as a form of hypercamouflage, often associated with certain political or militia groups, especially in the Middle East.
What is it camouflage?
It deliberately confuses the clear, linear distinction between civilian and combatant, between the state and the insurgent, between peace and war. It makes boundaries porous, intentionally ambiguous.
So when those boundaries break down completely?
When the lines between resistant softness and state solidity are, as the text says, terminally perforated, you get the guerrilla state. This is a political entity that thrives on opacity, on instability, on these hidden worm-like connections. Its power lies in not being clearly defined.
And the dense, obscure writing style of Negaristani or even the CCRU that mirrors this.
That seems to be the implication. The difficult, asymmetrical, almost coded nature of the texts reflects the political condition they describe, a state of but necessary instability, a system designed to resist easy definition.
Okay, so we have extreme speed, radical instability, hidden structures. It feels like this naturally leads to a sense of paranoia about what's even real. How does the individual navigate this? And does this connect back to the slop idea?
Absolutely. If the underlying reality, according to these frameworks, is inherently unstable and convoluted, then perception itself becomes a battleground. This directly feeds into the paranoia surrounding manipulated narratives and, yes, the dismissal of vast amounts of information as untrustworthy slop.
The sources mention media being used for psychological warfare, SDOPS.
Yes, explicitly. The idea isn't just about single fake news articles, but about a more systemic manipulation. Manufacturing false narratives through sheer repetition across platforms that seem credible, business sites like Inc. or Forbes, news aggregators, or using bot farms to amplify specific viewpoints endlessly.
So it's the cool mediums technique, low-definition messages, but overwhelming volume and repetition applied to propaganda. You see the same story echo across dozens, hundreds of sources, and even if each one is thin, the repetition creates this illusion of consensus, of reality.
Precisely. And it works, at least in terms of eroding trust. The data mentioned, like only 26% of adults under 50 trusting the media.
Yeah.
That points to a real crisis of perception. People feel overwhelmed, manipulated, leading to news fatigue, and just tuning out altogether.
McLuhan saw this coming too, didn't he? The speed of information changing politics.
He did. He argued that the speed of electrically transmitted information fundamentally shifts politics away from representation and delegation where you trust the expert or the politician to handle things toward immediate involvement from everyone. The public is suddenly plunged into the complexities, and it's messy.
Which would definitely shock the old guard, the traditional journalists or politicians used to controlling the narrative, having a single, stable point of view.
Exactly. That definite point of view was, for McLuhan, an illusion created by the slowness and fragmentation of print culture. Electric speed dissolves that illusion and forces instantaneous integrated decision-making and participation. You can't wait for the weekly report anymore. You're in the data stream.
Which brings us back again to this demand for total participation. If you can't trust the filtered, high-definition product from the specialist anymore.
You have no choice but to dive in and make sense of the raw, messy, low-definition flow yourself. You have to supply the depth, the connections, the meaning. The cool electric environment compels this deep audience involvement. It's not optional anymore.
And McLuhan said this cool environment favors a certain kind of communication style, right? Not hot takes or aggressive debate.
Right, because the medium itself is cool, it's actually poorly suited for hot issues or really sharp, aggressive personalities. It favors the presentation of processes over perfectly polished products. People who succeed in a cool medium often adopt a more low-pressure, inclusive, process-oriented style.
He used examples like Fidel Castro, right? Teaching politics on TV.
Yes, Castro apparently succeeded on TV not by being a fiery orator, but by patiently showing the process of governance, teaching politics like a class, or the other famous example, Richard Nixon. McLuhan argued Nixon's disastrous TD debates against the cooler JFK stemmed from his hot, aggressive style. But later, Nixon had success with a piano performance on TV.
Why did the piano work?
Because it showed a different side. Modest, involved, demonstrating a creative process. It was that integrated, involved, low-key presentation that connected with the cool medium's demands, not his sharp legal mind or debating skills. The medium wants to see the work in progress, the ongoing generation, not just the finished, static thing.
Which sounds uncannily like how AI models work, generating content as an ongoing process, not presenting a final, fixed artifact.
It's a striking parallel. The output is the process made visible.
But okay, this demand for total involvement, for navigating this chaotic flow, it sounds exhausting, maybe even dangerous. The sources talk about a schizo strategy.
Yes, it's presented as a kind of necessary survival tactic in this environment, but one that borders on pathological. To survive the constant onslaught of information and influence, you arguably need to be radically open to let it all flow through you.
But being that open
Is described as catastrophically unpleasant. It's the blade of openness, or the xenotempest. Constantly processing this undigested, low-definition flood from the outside is potentially shattering to the self. It induces a state of near-constant cognitive stress, a kind of functional paranoia.
And this state is compared to psychedelic experiences.
Explicitly, yes. The sources reference thinkers like Terence McKenna and the effects of tryptamine hallucinogens like psilocybin. The argument is that these substances induce a similar cognitive state, dissolving boundaries, making the impossible seem plausible, creating a feeling of contact with something alien and intelligent. It mirrors the informational overload and reality breakdown of the electric age.
Okay, this is where it loops back to the critique of slop in a really paradoxical way. The old guard, the specialists, they crave purity, right? Clarity, definition, control.
Yes, that desire for purity, sometimes linked in the sources to historical concepts like Aryan or Zoroastrian ideals of rigorous closure, seems to demand keeping the outside out, maintaining strict boundaries.
Which requires constant vigilance, maybe even.
Excessive paranoia, according to this framework. You have to build walls, filter relentlessly, to maintain that illusion of purity and control against the chaotic flood.
But here's the paradox.
The paradox is that this very act of rigorous closure, this intense effort to keep the outside out, is precisely what makes the system brittle and ultimately attracts the outside. By trying so hard to maintain purity, you create the conditions for your own overwhelming. The resistance to slop, seen this way, is a desperate self-defeating strategy. It's trying to hold back an inevitable tide, a necessary flood, and the result is simply that the system gets, as the source vividly puts it, butchered and cracked open.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a lot of ground today, from the CCRU's pretty bleak accelerationism at Warwick, through McLuhan's hot and cool media explaining the clash of cultures, and then deep into Negarestani's really dark occult geopolitics linking oil, ancient gods, and planetary decay.
It's a wild ride through these texts, but the thread connecting it all seems to be this relentless logic of acceleration, forcing a kind of chaotic, messy, democratization. It demands involvement and structurally requires instability.
So boiling it down, the resistance we see, the anger about AI slop from specialists, from the legacy creators, it's almost structurally necessary for them given their background in that hot, fragmented world that values clarity and control.
Exactly. Their reaction makes perfect sense from within their framework. But the argument presented here is that this resistance, however understandable, is ultimately futile against the sheer environmental force of the electric age. That age demands cool, messy, low-definition, instantaneous, total involvement.
And the stuff dismissed as slop is just the noise, the visual texture of that
It's
demand.
the surface manifestation, yeah. The sheer volume and apparent lack of polish is the unavoidable sign of this massive, enforced democratic participation in depth that the old system simply cannot process or tolerate.
And we also have McLuhan's idea about reprocessing, that each new technological environment turns its predecessor into an art form. The industrial age made agrarian life art.
Right, so the chaotic, accelerated participatory content of this new, cool electric age, it's busy reprocessing the old, fragmented, specialized mechanical age, turning that into its content, its art form perhaps.
Which leads us to a pretty provocative final thought, especially if we take seriously the accelerationist idea that decay isn't just negative, but a positive degenerating process, and McLuhan's idea that it's the artist, the person with integrated awareness, who grasps the meaning of new technologies.
Then the question we have to leave you, the listener, with is this. If decay can be generative, and if the old forms are being reprocessed,
What strange new masterpiece, or maybe what unexpected form of leper creativity, as one source puts it, might actually be secretly growing right now within that massive, overwhelming volume of stuff we're so quick to dismiss as just worthless slop? What new definition of value or art or meaning can only emerge from this messy, enforced participation and the simultaneous annihilation of the old, specialized order?